So now we're going to look at one of the operations that we're going to be using in lathe very often. Facing is just like in milling. You always face the part first, and that's basically to establish your zero and to square off your part. So looking at the prior video, you remember we added 30 thousandths of stock, or we shifted our stock in the Z 30 thousandths so that we had some material to remove here. And what we're going to do in this video is face this material off and square the bar in preparation for our roughing pass. So if you didn't watch the previous video, please go back and watch that on the setup. And with that, we're going to go ahead and go to turning, and we're going to select face, which is the fourth from the left hand side. Now I'm not following the tutorial strictly, so I'm basically just going to go through this and give you my own explanation, but please continue to use the tutorials as your guidelines, and if I happen to do something a little bit differently here, just go by the tutorial itself, because I'm going to be going through things a little bit differently possibly. So here's our facing. First thing I want to mention when we enter the facing command has to do with the tooling. So you know, with milling and drilling, you're more concerned about the geometry of the part, because that's going to establish or give you a sense of what you can actually do with that tool. In here, what we're looking at is the difference between roughing and finishing inserts. So talking about inserts could be a class all to itself, but in general, what we're looking at here is a right-handed and a left-handed tool refers to which direction the tool holder itself is in relation to clearance. So if you're using a right-handed tool, the tool holder itself is behind the actual cutting part to the right, and that's what we're going to be doing for the most part. We want to make sure we have all of our tool holding apparatuses on the right hand side. If you don't and you pick the wrong tool, you can kind of see we're going to end up having clearance issues. We could possibly bump into the jaw, or we just won't be able to cut the geometry like we want to. So the second thing to think about is the included angle of the cutter itself. So in this example, we have an 80-degree insert, and that is used for roughing. So the greater the insert angle, the more surface contact you have on the part, and you basically the roughing tools are going to have the larger angles. So the 80-degree rougher is what we're going to be using, and then just to show you a difference, so here's a 35-degree OD finish, and you can see that it's a much smaller area at the tip for finishing, versus here we're looking at you know, a fatter cutting area basically. So we have the T0101 selected, OD rough right hand side. I'm going to go ahead and in the comment I'm just going to do face the part, or face the stock, and we can just say we're removing 30 thousandths from the bar, something like that, to establish Z0, Z0.0. And again, this nomenclature is going to be different depending on, you know, where you're working. It's going to be specific, shop specific. A lot of the time you will see force tool change selected, and that just means that in between tool paths, even if you're using the same tool, it's still going to force the machine to go back to the carriage and then come back over. It's kind of a safety thing. It's a clearance. You know, your tool's not going to stall out here. It's always going to go back to the tool changer and then come forward again to your home position here. And then speeds and feeds, we're going to leave those at the default for now and not worry about those too much to start. Inside of face parameters, there's really only a few small things you have to worry about. On the left hand side, you'll see a box for use stock, and that basically means it's going to look at our stock geometry that we already generated in stock setup. It knows where to start and where to end and how much to remove, so that's really easy. The finish Z is going to be 0, which is basically right here at the access point. And again, that's where we're going to get our 30 thousandths. So we're just establishing 0 here. Our entry amount is 100 thousandths, which is good. We're going to leave that. That means that it's basically our clearance number. So the tool is going to start up here 100 thousandths above the stock and then come down and begin the facing operation. If we wanted a step over, we could turn that on just by referencing the cursor on the graphics here. You can see that the step over is the amount of material that it will take in the Z. So if we want to do this in 2 passes, for example, we could divide 30 thousandths by 2 right in that box and say we want to do 15 thousandths. That would generate 2 roughing passes. There's also a finish step over, which kind of accomplishes the same kind of thing. If you want to take a smaller amount for a finished pass, like 5, 10, 15 thousandths, you could also specify one here. I do usually leave the finish step over on, and what ends up happening is we're going to see this get machined off in 2 passes basically. Next thing is overcut amount. So the overcut is going to be the distance that the tool travels past the axis. If you don't specify an overcut amount, what can happen is the tool nose radius gets to 0, the tool pulls away, and you are left with a little of a nipple, like they call it a nipple, hanging on the end. And if you do not overcut that, you have to have an operator either manually cut that nipple off, or you can deburr it with sandpaper or a file. But if you do include the overcut, usually 10 thou, something like that is what I normally do. It goes past 0, it makes sure that all the material is removed and you won't have any hang-ons here. Then we have retract, which is basically the same thing as milling. It's just the distance your tool travels away from the part before it rapids off and back to its next position. So again, 100 thousandths is good by default. Again, we're all set with that. And then if we wanted to leave stock, we could do that. Most of the time we will not. We'll just go straight to 0. And that is mostly the only things that we're going to concern ourselves here with lathe facing. If for some reason you want to cut from the center, that's fine. Cross cut I've never actually used before, believe it or not. I have to check and actually see what that does. I'm not sure. But yeah, so that's basically it for facing. What we're going to do now is click OK. You'll notice that the stock updates, so it knows that we removed 30 thousandths. And again, this is just another example of why the stock is important for lathe, because as you machine material off, it actually updates in lathe versus not doing anything in milling for the most part. So let's go ahead and backplot this. We'll watch what happens. You know, the tool holder is not being shown. In this case, we're only seeing the actual insert. For lathe, I like to turn the whole tool on. So inside of backplot, to the right of the display tool button, there's also a display holder. I'm going to turn that on just so I can see all of our clearance issues. You know, if there's going to be a problem, we want to catch it here early on. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and run this. I'll slow it down a little bit. So here's our 100 thou clearance. It's actually only taking 1 pass. I probably have to adjust our cut increments smaller to get to do a different, to get to 2 passes if we're just going to do the 1. Or I could say 60 thousandths. We could make the stock a little bit farther out and then mess around with it that way. So we're going to see the overcut. So here's the slight overcut amount. And you can see why, you know, actually this is a good point. If you watch the back plot here, let's go back. You see what happens. So if we left it at 0, when the tool nose gets down to the center of the part, let's see if I can pause it in a good spot. So if it stopped here, this is what you're left with. You might have a little, like I said, they call it a nipple sticking out here, because the tool nose may stop a little bit ahead of the axis or right at the axis, and you have a little bit of material left over there. So the overcut takes care of that. Beautiful. So what we have here is a faced part. Everything is established at 0. And the next video we look at, we'll start talking about roughing.